Asking for help is hard enough, but finding the right kind of help, that's a whole other ballgame. Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm Kira Wackett. Thanks for joining me for another video as we work to empower and equip you with the confidence and skills to write your own story so that you can live a life on purpose. Today we're going to be walking through a series of questions to ask and considerations to hold when interviewing for and finding the right therapist for you. Many of us have conditioned ourselves to settle, to accept fine in life. So why should finding a therapist be any different? We leave our first session saying, they're fine, I guess, or we find ourselves so burnt out and overwhelmed that we're just gonna take whatever we can get. Now, this has been made worse, especially now, with waitlist periods expanding exponentially and many of us afraid that we just can't afford to be picky. But not being selective in your care can, in some cases, be of greater detriment to your long-term well-being than waiting it out. I'm sure many of you have had that crappy therapist experience. They just sat there, maybe nodding their heads, asking you, how does that make you feel? Repeatedly, ad nauseum. Or they said something so jarring and insensitive that you felt scarred by the experience. Maybe they didn't seem to listen to you or get you. Maybe they're not the right fit in terms of feel and connection, or they weren't trained in the particular areas that you are seeking therapy and support for. These experiences lead many people, including me, to stop seeking these services because they don't feel additive or supportive in our overall life and well-being. They decide therapy isn't helpful or see it as a drain rather than support and don't consider it in the future. If it didn't work before, why would I have hopes that it would work again? It feels like it's saving us energy by just checking that box off and saying it doesn't work. Now, don't get me wrong. I will be the first person to say that some therapists should absolutely not be in this profession. Some aren't the right fit for this profession or are motivated by their own ego more than the well-being of their clients. Some phone it in. I find those to be the worst. And some have too deep of wounds themselves that need to and deserve to be healed before they can give of themselves to others. And honestly, some are just bad. But that's not the majority. That's a minority. And while the small handful of therapists I've seen in my own life definitely skewed those stats dramatically in favor of the latter, as in they're not great as a whole, I can say that as a therapist, I've had the privilege of meeting countless people in this field that are doing truly amazing work. We just have to find the right ones for us. We have to know how to mine through resources to find that goodness of fit. For example, I'm really good at what I do, but I'm not really good for every patient. I'm directive, action-oriented, and blunt. I balance leading and following and can be pushy sometimes with clients. Not every client benefits from my approach. I'm also really skilled in a small subset of areas. Even if my personality is a fit, sometimes my knowledge is an important barrier to consider. And finally, sometimes I have to own the impact of my identity. Am I the best fit as a non-Black clinician to support someone working through their trauma related to being Black in America? Am I the best support for someone transitioning when I identify as a cisgender heterosexual woman? In some cases, a shared identity is maybe less important, but in many it is of the utmost importance and needs to be considered. So how do you, as a potential client, sort through all of this on top of your own distress and the waiting periods and admin stuff that feels so overwhelming? Well, first and foremost, you want to make sure that you like this person. If you're going to spend your time with someone, one of the most precious resources that you have, you better like being around them. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean you're going to like everything they say or do. Their job is to challenge you. But if you think the person is arrogant, annoying, or a major D-bag, then you'll never get anywhere, no matter how qualified or knowledgeable they are on the subject matter. In addition to liking them, you have to ask yourself if you're able to be honest with them. Providers get it wrong all the time. We make educated guesses and infer a narrative based on the way we conceptualize something and the experiences we've had. When we get it wrong, we need you to be able to call us out. After all, you are the expert on your own life, and we work for you. So if you feel bullied or pressured by a provider or don't feel comfortable giving that feedback to them, then I suggest you do say peace out and find a new one. The next thing to consider is, do you have a clear understanding of what they're doing and the why behind it? One of my professors in graduate school told us that when we finish a therapy session, they should be able to talk to us and our client separately, and we should both have the same understanding of what we did in the session, where we're going, and why. Why is this important? Because if you don't know what you're doing in therapy, how is that setting you up for long-term success? And you may start to feel resentful, frustrated, confused, or even hopeless when you're missing that piece of information. Now, this means that part of the responsibility is on you as the consumer to ask. And the bulk of that responsibility is on us as the therapist to make sure that we're having those conversations regularly with you. The next consideration is to look at whether or not they have appropriate training or skills in the area that you're looking for. It's painfully frustrating when I see or find out about someone practicing outside of the scope of their training, and it happens all the time. Personal trainers giving nutrition advice or acting as physical therapists, football players, actresses giving medical and nutritional advice. And one of the most offensive to me is when I see people in the coaching industry working with people with diagnosed eating disorders as someone who spent many years in training and specialization to deal with this really dangerous diagnosis. Now, I could chronicle my frustrations here, but that would be an entirely different blog post. So the point I'm making is to make sure that your provider, one, stays in their lane and practices within the scope of their expertise, and two, has the necessary qualifications to be offering the type of care they're providing. So now, in addition to some of these considerations, I want to give you some questions that you can ask to help you suss out some of the above and dive deeper into getting to know your potential therapist. So first, you can ask them, how do you talk about diagnoses and treatment goals with your clients? I find this to be one of the most important questions, as anyone in therapy receives a diagnosis, and it wasn't until I was in my 30s and 7+ different therapists later, from childhood trauma to now, that I was told my diagnosis directly. Talking about diagnoses and treatment goals is incredibly important in almost every case of treatment, and making sure that you, as the client, are an active part of the discussion and planning is key. The next thing to ask is, how are goals decided upon for each session or for our work overall? How often do we check in about them to see if something's changed or to make sure that we're on the right track? And I especially think it's important to ask them how they keep the sessions on track and prevent it from just becoming a weekly dump of what's happened in between sessions. This is big, as part of the common downfall in treatment is when therapy just becomes that weekly dumping ground for patients to offload stress and then they leave. It's not productive in the long run and tends to reinforce that stuckness for clients over time rather than move them through it. One of the other things to make sure you ask is, what's their comfort level talking about X, which in this case is whatever topic or issue that you're bringing in. You can also ask them, what experiences have you had working with X, or what training do you have addressing X? This comes up a lot when it comes to particular traumas and diagnoses, but also as it relates to different aspects of our identity and wanting to have a therapist specialized in specific areas and or affirming of our identities. From here, you want to ask, how do you handle situations or experiences that I might bring up that you don't agree with or feel like you have knowledge in? This helps you get a feel for how they respond to conflict and manage their responsibility in learning and making sure they stay informed. I find this helps me ask follow-ups to a potential client to determine when and how this may happen, or how people have responded in the past that has or has not been helpful or hurtful to them, so that we can construct some solutions that would work best for both of us when these situations occur. Another big one, and this is a prominent discussion in the field overall, is, do you use self-disclosure? Which means, how do you use and share personal information to connect to or talk about a particular point or process, or to share aspects of the self? I need to know my therapist as a person, at least on some level. And this can be a little bit tricky. Many of the therapists that I've had or have worked with in my professional setting have negative views on self-disclosure. And in some instances, they've had experiences where people really didn't take it well. So we have to think about what's the balance between knowing bits about our therapist so that they become human and we can relate to them. There's a sense of safety there, while also making sure that the focus is on us. One of the other questions I find particularly helpful is to ask about the clock and managing time. This is a great question just to know what to expect in terms of how your session timing will be managed, but also sets the stage for how your therapist might manage that uncomfortable situation of cutting things off and making sure sessions end on time. Now, this is something that I, as a therapist, have struggled with since I started my training. So when it comes to ending sessions on time, I always have a little bit more anxiety because I feel bad and I feel this sense of awkwardness that I think exists on both sides of the interaction. So letting clients know this up front has been a great way for me to communicate, this is something I'm working on, and sometimes I might not do it with as much tact and grace as I might like to. It can feel really hard to cut somebody off because I feel like I'm being rude. So telling them that lets them know I'm not trying to be rude. It might feel rude, and we're both going to go through this awkward thing together. Now, on the flip side of this, I, as a therapist in therapy, need to be able to have conversations about managing the clock because otherwise my anxious sort of perfection brain gets hyperfixated on doing that job for my therapist. I need to be able to be present without doing their job, and they need to be able to tell me that they can handle that without me doing those things. One of the other things I've learned over the years that can be particularly helpful in addition to all these pieces is to ask about supervision and consultation. So one of the most important things that we do to continue our learning as therapists is to seek that regular check-in about clients and getting input from other clinicians to expand how we conceptualize, make sense of, or provide support to all of you. This also ensures that we don't get stuck in a particular narrative or get informed by biases and assumptions or have any underlying transference, which means projected feelings from our own personal story and relationships show up in the therapy room. When we can get clear on some of those things and get that input from other clinicians, we're ensuring that we're providing you the most expansive care without it again getting stuck in some of those places. It helps keep the central point on you rather than us. So knowing how your therapist seeks that support or what they do to continue to expand on their thinking can help you ensure that you are getting that input from a variety of people, but in particular that your therapist is really thinking about how to broaden their scope and provide you with the most accurate and beneficial support. And the last question I like to ask, and in particular as a therapist who trains many therapists on burnout and compassion fatigue, is to ask them what they do for self-care. I honestly wish more clients asked me this, as clinician burnout is incredibly high in our field. And when clinicians aren't getting the support they need or taking care of themselves, they and you are going to suffer. So all in all, I want you to remember that with each of these questions, with each of these considerations, that the right fit rarely shows up right away. Therapy is one of the most intensive relationships that we will ever have. So be patient and kind with yourself and the therapist you're meeting in the process of finding the right fit. And if you're still feeling stuck or you need to talk through some specifics or work through some pieces in your own story, email me. Let's set up a session and we'll walk through this process together to really get clear on what are your pain points, goals, and define what support looks like for you in the process of achieving that. Now, before you go, I would love to hear from all of you in the comments. Maybe you want to share a good or bad therapy experience that you had and just make some space to make that known. Maybe write down a question or idea that stands out to you that I shared, or maybe something that's getting stirred up for you that could be great for us to consider when we're looking for potential support. And add in any other thoughts, ideas, insights, or even reflections if you try some of this when you're looking for your next provider, and let me know how it goes. Now, I know that this video threw a lot at you, and there are so many points that you're thinking about in terms of how you can bring this into your next interview for your next provider. So rather than you having to ferociously write down tons of notes or revisit this video every time, you'll find that I created a digital handout that I put a link to in the show notes that gives you all of these questions and considerations, as well as some blank space to jot down your own notes, other questions, and responses that providers might give you as you're going through this process. Feel free to print it, as many copies as you want, share it near and far. There are no license restrictions. This is for you and for anybody else to feel supported, again, in finding that right fit for you. Because at the end of the day, I as a therapist know that I can't see everybody. I can't provide care to the entire world, but I can help empower you to get the care that you need and deserve to live your best life. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe to save yourself the time and energy of having to check back regularly and get an alert whenever there's new awesomeness to check out. And if you want to stay really in the know on everything that I'm doing through Adversity Rising, click the link in the show notes to join my email list, which is the only place that I send information out to the world, and you will get exclusive info, blog posts that I write just for you, access to different resources that I provide, and an opportunity to connect with me more directly. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me today. I know that the process to finding support can be really tricky and overwhelming, but I want you to remember that you are in the driver's seat of seeking and attaining the care that you need. So don't settle for fine. Don't settle for the earliest appointment that you can get. Be ruthless in making the decisions about who gets to be on your care team, rather than feeling like you get to be on their patient list. The people that are working for you need to be working for you, and we have to make sure that we give them the opportunity to learn about what that looks like and give ourselves the opportunity to vet our resources effectively so that we can start to build that foundation of belief that we're all deserving to thrive and gain that support in our lives. Remember, you have the right to author your own story. So let's go get that pen back. See you next time.